Faza'il A'maal, More Trouble Than It's Worth, Part 5, Sheikh Muhammad Zakariyya's Biography.
Rasulullah said, Man hajj al-bayt falam yadhurni faqad jafa'ni. The one who goes for hajj and doesn't visit me has shunned me. This hadith is not weak, it is fabricated. It is a fabrication.
Yet another fabrication found within the book known as the Faza'il A'maal and the book that I will refer to as the FA. In this part, I was unsure whether to do this or not because it seems that the pages dealing with the biography of Sheikh Muhammad Zakariyya seems to be quite straightforward. You have a standard lineage, a standard description of how in Islamic literature biographies are given. Here I give you the screenshot of the pages and what's actually mentioned. It goes from page 87 all the way to page 144, so it's quite a detailed biography of the individual, and there's not really many things to comment upon. I've already mentioned in the previous part his Sufi pedigree, and this thing goes into detail about the voluminous nature of his written works and his influence within the TJ movement. So you've got his place of birth, which was in 1898. You've got his upbringing, his seeking knowledge, his teaching career, his bay'ah, which means his allegiance into Sufi orders, the 4 orders that were given, his pilgrimages, his daily activities, his moral and physical characteristics, his marriage and offspring, his students and his works, and then specifically the works that he did in relation to his career within the TJ. So the only things that I'll cherry pick, and it is very much cherry picking, is the following things. He mentions on page number 86 of the thesis that in writing this biography there was a lot of confusion as to who exactly the author of the FA was, and this is what he states: we found some people confused about the name of the author, and some people thought that it was Muhammad Yusuf al-Kandahlawi, who wrote another book called Hayat al-Sahaba. Other believed it was Muhammad Ilyas Kandahlawi, who was actually the founder of the movement, and other people believed that it was other people. So there was no clarity as to who exactly this person was. So who he is Muhammad Zakariyya Kandahlawi. He is born in 1898 and he dies in 1982, and he writes very many books. One of those books is the book that is the subject of our study, and he wrote another book called Awjaz al-Masalik, which was an explanation of another famous hadith work by one of the 4 eponymous madhab founders, Imam Malik. But something that is very interesting that we found in this biography is the following thing. He says on this page that he studied the Arabic alphabet and he learned how to read the Quran, and one of the things that he used to read the Quran was this book called, in footnote number 197, Al-Qaida Al-Baghdadiyya, and it explains how this is a simple elementary book about the alphabets. And another example found in the subcontinent is one called Al-Qaida Al-Nuraniyya. So these 2 books, Al-Baghdadiyya and Nuraniyya, are widespread in the hundreds within the West, within England actually, and the thousands across the world. These books are just as well widespread as the FA. However, no one would ever raise any objections to these 2 books, Al-Qaida Al-Baghdadiyya and Al-Qaida Al-Nuraniyya. And yet, despite the many bowdlerized versions of the FA, you can still find objections quite extreme and quite widespread objections to the Faza'il A'maal. So that's one thing to note. So we are not against all the literature of the TJ. It's just the literature that contains these fabrications and these errancies in belief and practice. Another thing that's worthy of mention here is his study of Hadith. So this is on page 104, and the sources given are very well known Deobandi TJ sources. An individual called Muhammad Yusuf Banuri, in his introduction, Abdurrahman Yusuf bin Abdurrahman, Wali ad-Din Al-Nadwi, and Muhammad Zakariyya himself. So many well-known Deobandi sources actually state this, and it says some biographers of Sheikh Muhammad Zakariyya mentioned that he had studied under his father the 6 books of Hadith, and these 6 books are the 2 famous ones, Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawood, Nasa'i, Ibn Majah, and At-Tirmidhi. So they said that he studied all 6 books except the Sunnah of Ibn Majah, and some of them said that he didn't even study he did study the Sunnah of Ibn Majah, but this lacks accuracy. These sources, people like Banuri and Nadwi himself, he didn't actually affirm that he did study these 6 books. In fact, he said himself that he did not read Sahih Muslim with his father. So there's a few questions here. This Hadith master, we have to question his actual study of these early Hadith books according to these luminaries of Deoband themselves. So that's something that we need to reflect upon. And another thing that we need to reflect upon is his name that I mentioned earlier, because there is confusion around his name. This diagram by the author explains it very clearly as to who he is and how he is related to these other individuals within the TJ. So the progenitor is a man called Muhammad Ismail ibn Ghulam Hussein Kandahlawi, and he has 4 sons. Then you have Muhammad Ilyas, and he is the founder of the TJ movement. Remember my series, The Curate Seg, talked about the main ideologue of the movement, which was Ashraf Ali Thanvi. But Muhammad Ilyas has a son called Muhammad Yusuf, and he's the second in charge. And it's from this line that you have the current leader, who is actually within a schismatic battle with other TJ leaders at the moment. So that's one lineage, one son, and the line that you get. And then the son of Muhammad Yahya is Sheikh Muhammad Zakariyya. So this is a very good diagram explaining exactly the different Muhammads, Muhammad Ilyas, Muhammad Yusuf, Muhammad Zakariyya, and exactly how they stack up in TJ hierarchy. Enough of the TJ. Now I come to a book called Struggling to Surrender, and it's written by an American mathematician called Jeffrey Lang, and it's called Some Impressions of an American Convert to Islam. Now this book is very useful, because what I will be doing in this series is I will be going through a lot of academic works. In fact, I can comfortably say that I've read the vast majority of academic works in relation to Hadith sciences in the English language. I've also had a go at some German language reading and French as well. In any case, he states, and this book is useful, this Struggling to Surrender book is very useful, because he gives in chapter 3 an excellent overview of the academic approach to Hadith. It's superb because he goes through all the main figures, Goldziher, Shat, Yun Bowl, all these figures are mentioned, and their theories are very well laid out, because he is a mathematician and he has a mathematical logical mind. But then he comes up with this conclusion. This is found on page 104. As a new Muslim, for reasons I mentioned earlier, I was extremely suspicious of the prophetic traditions, and it was not until 4 years after my conversion that I came across a book in English on Hadith criticism by a Muslim author. That was more than likely, he doesn't mention it, but it was more than likely Azami's book. And then he compared the Western Orientalist tradition with the Muslim authors' readings, and then he mentioned this individual called Titus Burckhardt, and he said that he found the Orientalist traditions and their conjectures daring, interesting, but their conclusions unrealistically cynical. So if you want a good overview of Western Orientalist study, just an overview of it, just read, if you don't read the whole book, just read chapter 3, and it will give you an excellent example of exactly what the Orientalists are saying about the Hadith tradition. Another point that you can get from this book that's very useful is something that is intrinsically linked with the TJ, and that's the following of a madhab, because they're staunchly Hanafist in their outlook. He says on page 104, the inerrancy of traditions, and traditions is the word he uses for hadith, meaning the fact that they're inerrant, is a popular belief among Muslim masses, and is a legacy of the era of blind following or taqleed, imitation. So this blind following of madhabs leads to a belief that's popular amongst Muslims that all traditions are inerrant, when in fact a reasoned critical study of the genre of literature suggests there are errors within the tradition, there is human fallibility, but that does not mean the tradition has to be thrown out whole meal. It means that we should have a critical mind, and it's things like taqleed, blind imitation, that causes us to have unscientific, unrealistic, uncritical beliefs. Stay tuned for many more parts.